So we're getting close to the 2017 NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, and that's where we really start to officially enter the silly season of the NFL offseason, and in particular the draft season, because you're going to see the workout warriors, the guys that broad jump, 300 million feet, and their verticals through the roof, and they blow up their 40 time and people start blowing them full of gas and talking about how great they are, even if their film suggests that they might not be a very good player. Some guys will unfortunately drop because of their workouts at the combine, even though their film suggests that these guys are football players, not necessarily great athletes. So we know it's coming. So I will say this, is I do expect my next mock draft after this one, after the combine, to have significant changes to it, because that's where things start to really come into form and start to play out and shape up after the combine. Then you start getting into the individual pro days. And that's when the draft board really starts to take shape. So lo and behold, nonetheless, the one good thing, we got the announcement of the compensatory picks for the 2017 draft. So you get some bonus picks with this 3-round mock because it includes the compensatory picks for round 3. Seems to be a lot more of them than I remember from years past. My goodness, especially round 3. But nonetheless, you can check out my 3-round mock in the description box down below. Now, disclaimer, as with most of the mocks that I do this early in the process, and this is still pretty early in the process, we're not even in March yet, there's always going to be some type of scenario at play. The scenario at play this time is what happens if a quarterback does go in the top 10, or in this case, the top 5. How does it help this draft shake out? So that was the whole thing. It was, where does that first quarterback go? And then what does that do to all the other dominoes that fall into place? So let's just start off here. Now, and once again, Myles Garrett is number 1 on the board, even though I don't think he should be. I will not knock the Cleveland Browns if he ultimately is their pick, because especially them playing a 4-3 full-time, he is a great natural fit, better than if they were playing a 3-4 full-time. And I don't think Myles Garrett has bust factor. I think he has stud potential. I just don't think he's the best defensive lineman in this class, frankly. I don't think he's the second best defensive lineman in this class. I think he's the third. He's still a stud. But I think Jonathan Allen and Solomon Thomas, respectively, are just a little bit better. Not by a ton, not by a gaping margin, but I just don't understand where so many people are getting off saying that Myles Garrett is so head and shoulders above everybody else in this draft and he's the clear-cut number 1 player. I just didn't see that reality on film. It's very reminiscent to me of 2014 with Jadeveon Clowney, and then you had Khalil Mack and Aaron Donald, and we saw how that kind of played out. All 3 of them ended up being studs, but the guy that went number 1 overall, it took him 3 years to finally be healthy enough and get put in the right position at defensive end in a 3-4 to ultimately become the stud that was envisioned for him coming out of South Carolina. Again, it would be hard to knock the Browns for taking him number 1, but I don't think he's the best player on the board. And even in that case, you still got to talk about Cleveland, the fact that only leave it to Cleveland to get the number 1 overall pick in a draft without a clear-cut, true blue franchise quarterback. Oopsie daisies. Number 2, though, with San Francisco, it's impossible to know what the hell they're going to do. I have no clue. And frankly, if anybody else does at this point in time, they're lying to you. They could take Jonathan Allen here, as I've got them mocked to do right now, but that was kind of a conservative choice. They could take a Solomon Thomas. They could take a Reuben Foster. They could take a Jamal Adams. They could take a Mitch Trubisky. The fact is, they could take any of those guys. And to insinuate that taking one of them as opposed to another is kind of stupid is just kind of stupid to argue or belabor the point right now, because we just don't know. And that's the one real wild card in this mock, even more so than number 4 at Jacksonville, because they can go a variety of different directions. The 49ers at number 2, who knows what the hell they're going to do, and who knows what the hell John Lynch is ultimately going to decide upon. Be interesting to see what happens. Now, I think at the end of the day, there will probably be at least 2 quarterbacks that go in the first round of this draft. Too many teams are too quarterback needy to not have that be the case. Doesn't mean that technically any of them deserve to go in the first round, or more so in particular, none of them deserve to go high in the first round, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, it wouldn't really shock me if one or two of them did go in the first round and one of them went in the top 10. Now, in this particular case, unfortunately, it's my Chicago Bears that are saddled with the responsibility of drafting Mitch Trubisky number 3. Andy Dalton is a solid NFL starting quarterback. Andy Dalton is not worth a top 3 NFL draft pick, in my opinion. And when I see Mitch Trubisky, that's what he kind of reminds me of in many ways. Now, he can make some big special money throws, there's no question about it. But a lack of experience, some of that concern that I have about once the chips get down, does he kind of mentally fold a la Jay Cutler? I have some real concerns there. But in this particular scenario, the Bears don't get a Garoppolo deal done. They're done with Cutler finally, thank mercifully or Lord. They got to find their quarterback, and this is where they go. And at least if anything else, I would say with the Bears, if they took Trubisky here at number 3, at least they must have clearly identified their dude. At least they have finally drafted their young signal caller, and now the rebuild officially begins. In general, this is a really good defensive draft. I would expect the most impact in this draft to come out of defensive players, the most Pro Bowlers out of this draft to be on the defensive side of the ball, the most All-Pros, and potentially the most Hall of Famers. I think there are a couple of guys that could end up being consistent All-Pro / Hall of Fame performers out of this draft class. I really do. And I expect most of them to be on the defensive side of the ball. Again, the running back class, the tight end class is really, really good. If the quarterback class was really a little bit better, or quite a bit better, this draft class would look really, really outstanding. Because no draft class is going to have every position loaded. When you look at this draft, though, the linebackers are better than they have been in recent years. The corner class has a ton of talent and depth to it. The safety class has a ton of talent and depth to it, especially compared to previous years. The defensive line, edge rusher, pretty much almost everywhere on the defensive side of the ball looks pretty good. You still have some wide receivers I think can contribute at the NFL level. I think one or two of these quarterbacks in this draft could potentially develop into NFL starters. Franchise guys, maybe, maybe not. This is a good draft. I think it's better than the 2016 draft. If the quarterbacks were better, this would potentially be a great draft class. Now, to make sure that I talk about a couple of different teams as opposed to just always talk about the top of the draft, let me talk about some of the biggest winners and losers based off of the way this mock played out. And again, it's just going to touch on a couple of teams. I could talk about other teams too if I had enough time. Biggest winners, I think I'd go with Tennessee, even though they don't have the second round pick because of the move they made up from 15 to 8 last year to go get Jack Conklin. If they came out of this draft with Reuben Foster at 5 and Mike Williams at 18, they got to feel really, really good about themselves. They potentially got 2 impact players at 2 positions where they could use upgrades. And they wouldn't require them to have to move up, wouldn't have to get fancy and try and trade down. They just would have 2 guys come into their laps, and it would make sense for them based on where they're picking and what their needs are and how the board shakes out. Carolina, getting Solomon Thomas to fall to them at number 8, I think would be great. Melifonwu, the safety from UConn, is probably going to be one of those combine workout warriors, but he can actually play some. So to get him in the early portion of round 2, there'll be another plus for the Panthers, another athlete for the defense that really actually needs them. And then even getting a Deontay Foreman in the 3rd round. I think he's a guy that's got some Jonathan Stewart to him and can possibly replace Jonathan Stewart relatively quickly as a ball carrier. Cincinnati, getting Dalvin Cook at 9. Jabril Peppers in round 2, Jared Davis in round 3. These are 3 guys that have impact potential for this team. And in the case of Cook and Peppers in particular, you're getting some exceptionally outstanding athletes. And the Bengals, frankly, could use those type of athletes because those type of special, outstanding athletes could develop potentially into difference makers. Then I look at the Philadelphia Eagles, getting Corey Davis, the number 1 wide receiver in this draft class at pick 15. Getting Cordrea Tankersley from Clemson and Samaje Perine from Oklahoma. I'm sorry if I'm butchering any of these guys' names. But you look at Philadelphia, they'd be addressing a gaping void at wide receiver, gaping void at corner, and a gaping void at running back, and they're not reaching for any of those guys. In fact, they're getting pretty good value at all 3 spots. I think that'd be a really good draft for the Eagles coming off of the heels of getting Carson Wentz out of last year's draft. Now, in terms of biggest losers, I would go Cleveland Browns, not just to pick on the skid marks. God knows I love to. And even in this case, them picking Deshaun Watson at the top of round 2 Wouldn't be a bad thing. I would applaud them for taking Njoku at number 12, even if a lot of people would criticize that. But it would be the fact of nothing else that they got the number one pick in the draft without a clear-cut franchise quarterback. Their timing was off, and that makes them losers, even if they win in terms of the type of talent that they get out of this draft. Until they find that quarterback, and maybe Deshaun Watson could develop into that guy, but that's a lot of hoping and reaching at this point in time. We'll just see. The Chicago Bears, getting Mitch Trubisky at number 3 would make them losers to me, even though in the grand scheme of things, at least I could say, if nothing else, okay, it's time to get behind the guy. I can see some of what the Bears are excited about, but they better not hope for a ton of positive immediate results because he's going to need work and he's going to take time. The New York Jets with Marshon, Lattimore, you're talking about a guy with tremendous athletic upside at the corner position, and he's a top 10 talent in this draft according to a lot of people. But it would be yet another first-round pick that Jets spent on the defensive side of the ball. And when you've got guys like Dalvin Cook on the board, even if Fournette is gone, you've got Dalvin Cook, you've got Corey Davis at some point in time, or even in this mock draft situation, a Patrick Mahomes second, you bypass all those players on offense to get yet another defensive guy in round 1. And your defense still stinks. And that would make the Jets losers in this situation. If you're a team in this draft, to me, you're desperately trying to get as many picks in rounds 2 through 4 as you possibly can. Because the talent and depth in those rounds is really, really good. Really good. And I would expect several of those guys taken on day 2 of the draft and even at the beginning of day number 3 to prove themselves in 2 or 3 years when people start doing remocks of the 2017 draft to be guys that, you'll slot into the top 10, 15, 20 picks of the draft 3 years later. That's the quality of depth at certain positions in this draft class. I expect it to be a draft where you can go in, and if you do things right, in the first 3 to 4 rounds, you get 3 to 4 starters and get some real impact players that can make a difference for you. It's a good draft class. I just wish the quarterbacks were a little bit better because this could really be a great draft class. But again, you can check out my full 3-round mock, including the compensatory picks in the description box down below, and let me know what you think of this particular scenario.